England versus India. The Cricket Badger Test Match Daily Podcast. Can Joe Root's England dominate on home soil? 5 mouth-watering Test matches. Can Virat Kohli's India conquer the final frontier? Loving to talk Test cricket every day.
Hello, cricket badgers everywhere. Welcome along. It is the final edition of our England against India Test Match dailies. And, probably a little bit earlier than expected, as was the finish of the 5th Test match. But today we are getting together as many of the fan badges that could make it. And we are giving out our end of series awards and just having a look back over the 4 Test matches that we actually managed to complete. I am joined on today's podcast, Nakul Pandey, Neil Varani, Mark Hilton, and Rito Maitra are with me. And so we have 6 awards to give out. And let's start with the first one. Let's get straight into the awards and we can talk about the series around these awards. And the first one is he says as he gets his envelopes ready, gold envelopes, everybody's in dinner jackets and ball gowns. England Player of the Series. Now, I have to say, usually we go for 4 nominations. Today, I struggled to put it out to 3, and I think sums up where England were in this series. Excuse me. But the nominations, gentlemen, are Joe Root, Jimmy Anderson, and Ollie Robinson. And the winner is Joe Root. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Nakul Pandey, come in and talk to me. England Player of the Series, that was about as landslidey a vote, I think, from you badges as we could possibly get.
Yeah, it's like the Lord of the Rings: Return of the King sweeping the Oscars and winning in every single category that it's nominated in. Joe Root was head and shoulders the best batter in the series on both sides for mine and anyone else's money, as it turns out. His run of 100.
We'll find out if you're right, actually, in a few categories' time. But
his run of hundreds eventually came to an end in the 4th Test, and as it turns out, final test. But he looked absolutely magnificent at Trent Bridge, at Lords, and at Headingley. Rarely have I seen someone look so in control for so long against a good attack, particularly as other batters on both sides to some extent, but particularly England were struggling to score. He was not only surviving but scoring runs all around the wicket, and you could tell it became very obvious just how much he was dominating, how much he was in India's thoughts. That at pretty much every stage of any innings, the field to him was completely different to the field from everybody else, where you wouldn't have as many slips, you wouldn't have as many close catches, you'd have boundary riders, particularly on the offside. They tried with the deep third very fine. They tried it with the deep third quite wide. They tried with the backward point. They tried with the backward point and the deep third, and cutting off cover points.
There's a reason for that, Nakul, and it's got to be said all the way through Sri Lanka, India away, this home series against India. Joe Root's been playing a different Test match. The England batsmen have been going out struggling and struggling to find form and runs, and Joe Root's just been incredible.
Yeah, and he's got this ability to play off the back foot to good length deliveries, which very few other players have, which means that he's got so many more scoring options. He is not, and that means that, and then when you do pitch up full, he's happy to drive you. So he was getting deliveries that might look shorter. The ball didn't seem to be doing as much to him at times, and it took some really, really good bowling on the few occasions that he did get out for under 100 or under a significant score. It took some really good bowling from Jasprit Bumrah, and then some slightly lucky bowling from Shardul Thakur at times. That Root Bumrah battle was fantastic throughout the whole series, and it again signs beyond just the numbers of how much Joe Root was ahead of everybody else. That his Jasprit Bumrah was the only bowler who could contain him, and Joe Root was the only batter against who looked comfortable against Jasprit Bumrah at most points in the series. I was there at Trent Bridge for his 100, for his first 100 of the series, and it was an absolute delight to watch. And I think in terms of, not necessarily in terms of impact on the match, but certainly in terms of control, I think it got better and better through Lords and Headingley. It was magnificent.
Yeah, I mean, just the stats themselves: 564 runs, 94 average, 3 centuries. Just incredible performance, Neil, wasn't it? I mean, you would have been supporting India, hoping they could nick out Joe Root early, and that very rarely happened.
Yeah, and I think we've seen players play beautifully in the odd Test match before, but Root through the series, in fact through this year, has reached that plane where he's doing it consistently across a series, and that's what really sort of elevates the true greats. They completely dominate for a long period of time, and captains just don't know what to do. I think we saw it from Smith a couple of times over the last 5 years, from Kohli 2 or 3 years ago, but no one comes close to him. And apart from Bumrah, who again seems to be back towards the top of his game, it took until the 4th Test for Virat to figure out bowl Shardul. He's the most innocuous of the 5 bowlers, and Joe Root maybe will lose just that tiny bit of concentration, which he did at Trent Bridge when he got out in the first innings, and he definitely seemed to just relax a little, and that's how he ended up just sort of gliding the ball onto his stumps at the Oval. But his concentration otherwise was absolutely perfect, and he just didn't make mistakes. There weren't chances. It wasn't one of those where he was getting dropped once or twice. Yeah. He just didn't give chances at all.
Mark, there were times in Joe Root's time with England that, as captain, people were saying, look at his record as captain, look at it as it was as non-captain. He seems to have put that to bed now as well, doesn't he? Because his form as captain is as good as it's ever been.
Yeah, well, he's made that slight technical adjustment to his game, which he talks about quite a lot in terms of not going back and across and just stepping, just a slight change to his trigger movement. And that seems to have helped him in his concentration, the way he can find the strike. You know, he's just looking very at ease in the crease. So that conversion rate, obviously, that was talked about when he first came in as captain. And it was a problem for a while, as you know, over the last 16 months or so, has transformed itself. So, we've said it many times before. It looks in complete control of the crease. I think Knuckle and Neil have summed it up quite nicely. It's also the pressure that he was under as captain. I mean, there was, we talked about that before. You know, he's coming off lack of preparation, players not performing, and so having all that pressure around you, it's even more. It's even more meritorious to a certain degree that he performs. So, yeah, still a 16 months, and we'll have to see. He'll have a rest now, obviously. Not going to the 2020 World Cup, which I find odd when he's taking Sam Billings, but he isn't going, and he'll have a rest for Australia.
We'll see about Australia, because I mean that's a completely different podcast probably, but there's doubt about whether some of the big players are going to go to Australia. Yeah, Rito, final word on Joe Root for now, at least. Best batsman in the world in Test cricket?
Yeah, certainly the ICC Test ranking suggests so. Before the start of the series, there was a concern with Joe Root's home Test form. He hadn't scored 100 at home since 2018. Now he looks to have got his mojo back, and he is just back in that Fab Four. He has put that debate to bed now, whether he is a part of that Fab Four or not. And another debate that has been put to rest is which is his best batting position. That's number 4.
That's because, well, you've got no comparison there, Rito, because he never bats anywhere else, has he? But he refuses to be lodged anywhere else in the order. Yeah, when you say Fab 4, though, Rito, Babar Azam, Fab 5. It's the Fab 5 these days. Neil's shaking his head. No, we can't get into that discussion. We can't. We've got too much to talk about. Let's move on to the next award. Bowler of the series. Now, this is from either side. And the way we decided these awards, by the way, is that all of the fan badges that have been coming on and myself have all had a vote in each of these categories. I've tallied them up, and we've got the following results in this category. Bowler of the series, then. The nominations are Ollie Robinson, Jasprit Bumrah, and Jimmy Anderson. Drum roll, please. And the winner is Jasprit Bumrah. Rito, let's come back to you first. That was quite a solid vote for Jasprit Bumrah. Very few votes elsewhere. Ollie Robinson got a couple of mentions for his stellar efforts in his first English summer, but Jasprit Bumrah was just quality, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. There was a bit of criticism of him. He just didn't look ready for that World Test Championship final, and the Indian fans were very disappointed with his performance. But come into this Test match, he has just put all those criticism to bed again. He looked a class apart when all the Indian bowlers looked flat. Bumrah provided that point of preference. He bowled at good pace, and all with those toe-crushing Yorkers and those in-swinging balls, the England batsman didn't have a lot of answers apart from Joe Root.
Mark, when we talk about the best all-round bowler in the world, across all formats, white ball, red ball, I think of Jofra Archer. In the pace department I'm talking about, I think of Jofra Archer, Kahisa Rabada, and Jasprit Bumrah. But I think on the evidence of what we've seen over the last year in Test cricket, Jasprit Bumrah is possibly even noses ahead in that race now. He's possibly number one.
I think so. I think he's the best pace bowler in the world at the moment. I think Knuckle wrote a piece when he was summing up the kind of which Test match it was. It was the fourth Test match, wasn't it?
Don't mention Knuckles' pieces. You'll make his head go big.
Well, comparing him to Waqar Younis and the Yorkers he was bowling, and and he is the closest that we've seen to Waqar Younis in the execution of that particular skill, I think, in Test match cricket since Waqar was on the stage. Certainly those deliveries in the fourth Test. So I think he is the all-round. I mean, it's such a peculiar action as well. Every time I watch him, I kind of think, how does he manage to? Because it goes against any textbook kind of description of a fast bowler, really. How does he manage to generate that pace and hostility of that kind of almost kind of weird rocking horse type of
It comes back to when he was a kid, I think. He had the constraints of the size of his backyard or back garden, didn't he?
Well, it shows you how environment can play a part in people's lives in all different types of ways. But for me, he's definitely, in all conditions, the best fast bowler in the world at the moment, in my opinion. And
Jasprit took 18 wickets in this series in the 4 matches played, average of 20.83, best bowling in the match of 9 for 110, and the 1-5 for the 5 for 64, Neil. And when he was on, England always had a problem, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of wickets is probably a little bit lower than you'd expect, given the quality of his bowling, but that actually speaks more to how much the Indian team bowled as a team, and there was a fairly wide spread across the board. But it was those clutch moments when you needed something to happen to make a breakthrough. Then he was the person you could turn to, and he's the king of the currents. Really, he was the one who made things happen. He bowled an absolutely ridiculous ball to Ollie Robinson at Lord's when Robinson and Butler seemed to be kind of dragging England to a draw. The balls to Pope, to Bairstow, and to Joe Root, the Yorker against Joe Root, it took someone of Joe Root's skill in Joe Root's form as he is at the moment to somehow keep that ball out. It was better than the balls to Pope and to Bairstow, and it really took someone who was having an absolute worldie themselves to keep that out. When it mattered, Jasprit Bumrah turned up and took wickets which won India games, and I think that's the real difference in this series between Anderson and Robinson and Bumrah. It's that Bumrah's wickets, Bumrah's moments led to wins. And
I can see what Neil's saying there, Knuckle. I mean, you look at the wickets taken in the series: 18 for Jasprit, 21 for Ollie Robinson, Jimmy Anderson with 15, and they all had their moments, obviously, as the summer went through. But as Neil says, Jasprit, Virat threw him the ball and tended to be when they needed a wicket, when they needed something to change, Jasprit Bumrah delivered.
Yeah, you mentioned when he was on that England found it hard. He wasn't off really at any point in this series, I don't think.
He's very rarely off full stop, isn't he? Really,
it is pretty remarkable. I mean, there were people saying before he made his Test debut in 2018 that he'd only be a white ball player and he wouldn't be able to adjust. But one of the things I find most amazing about Jasprit Bumrah, not amazing is probably the wrong word, but most impressive about Bumrah is how quickly he learns and how quickly he adds to his game. Think back to 2018. He was mostly bringing the ball into the right-hander and then has this outswinger that he's been working on, brings it out for the first time ever in I think in international cricket, certainly in Test cricket, and absolutely nails it first up to poor Keaton Jennings. He has developed his Yorker. He's got bringing out that off cutter in Test matches, and that ball he got to Robinson. I was there on that final day at Lords, and it took a few replays to work out exactly what he'd done watching it live. That's how good it was. That skiddy bouncer, which he uses every now and again, he was getting life out of some pitches that weren't at times all that helpful to seamers. And then reverse swing, which I don't think he's ever had the opportunity to bowl in Test cricket before because of the pitches he's been playing on. He doesn't play very much at home, where in India, where reverse swing can be a factor, and you certainly don't get it in limited overs cricket. But he controlled it beautifully. And thank you, Mark, for plugging my piece so I didn't have to. But it was sometimes a comparison or a hook for a piece or for a bowling spell screams out at you, and that's exactly what that spell on that final day at the
I've
Oval.
just seen the fiver, Knuckle, just drop from your box into Mark's there.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the
had I got paid anything for that piece, Mark would have been on a percentage. But as it was, you can have your 10% of nothing. But it was the obvious comparison, and that spell of 2 for 6 in 6 overs completely turned the game on its head. But I'm going back to the question about the match-winning spells. I think it's Anderson and Robinson felt like they were carrying the England attack to some extent. And Wokes bowled very well, I think, in the last Test match, that in the fourth Test match, but there wasn't at times the support. There always was for Bumrah. Someone stood up at pretty much every time. It really, Ishant Sharma in the third Test was the only genuinely bad performance by an Indian bowler. So I think that helped. He wasn't having to create all of the pressure by himself. He wasn't having to both be a holding bowler and a wicket taker. But so he was able to just create this pressure and create this sense that you give him the ball and he's going to get a wicket, or he's going to make things very difficult, or he's going to get a wicket for someone at the other end, and he's using every single skill in the book. I mean, in terms of the best bowler in the world, I mean, in Test cricket, you can make a case for Anderson, you can make a case for Patrick Cummins, you can make a case for Josh Hazlewood at his best. But I think if you go all format, I don't think there is anybody to touch Jasprit Bumrah right now. He's that good, and he's got another 3-4 years, maybe more, at the peak of his powers. I mean, he's only 27 years old. He talked about. I watched his interview with Dinesh Karthik that he did. It was a long.
He came across really well in that, didn't he?
He always comes across well. He's clearly someone who thinks a lot about his cricket and about his bowling, and loves fast bowling as an art form. And he talked about how he's never bothered changing his run up because it's never caused anything to go wrong for him, and he tried lengthening his run up, and he was bowling the same pace anyway. So why bother wasting the energy? He talked about how he put a little bit too much on himself in terms of wanting to be the man to make the outcome happen in the World Test Championship final, and he just managed to relax a little bit and concentrate on his skills. I mean, it sounds like it can sound that kind of boring stuff that athletes talk about processes and all of this stuff, but I think it just showed that how good Jasprit Bumrah bowling normally is, and he didn't really have to go for maximum pace at any point in this series because he is such a skillful bowler as well. It's just such a shame that we didn't manage to get Bumrah and Archer into this series at the same time. So I think that would have been joyous to watch. But Jasprit Bumrah in a series where the standard seam bowling was excellent by and large, or at least very good. He got my vote, and really, when I was thinking about it, it wasn't that close in my head.
Let's move on to the next category. India's Player of the Series is the next one we're going to have a look at. The nominations for this award. And as you can see, there aren't any awards and the players aren't here, but it's all relevant. The nominations are Shardul Thakur, Rohit Sharma, and Jasprit Bumrah back in contention as well. And the winner of the India Player of the Series, voted for by the Badgers, is Rohit Sharma. Rito, let's bring you back in. Rohit Sharma, criticised in the past, and still his stats far better at home than he is away. Average nearly 80 at home. Was less than 30 starting series. Got his maiden Test century overseas though in this Test series, and I thought was absolutely superb at the top of the order. You know, he was having Jimmy Anderson moving the ball, the new ball. He had Ollie Robinson at the other end bowling very nicely. But Rohit Sharma tended to stand firm and stand tall.
Yes, absolutely. He has been a fantastic white ball opener for the last 7, 8 years now. Why didn't he just back up those performances in the Test arena? We didn't know. And in this series, he scored his first 100 overseas, missed out at Lords. With the series on the line at the Oval, India under a bit of pressure, he played a superb innings and scored his maiden 100 overseas. And also, in the middle of the series, there was a bit of concern with him getting out, hooking to balls, short deliveries. Now, he walked on that during the series and just issued that. That's a sign of a truly class player.
Yeah, 368 runs for Rohit in this series, high score of 127, that maiden overseas century, an average of 52.57 mark. And England would pay quite a lot of money to have him, wouldn't they?
It certainly would. And I think it's, again, looking at his performance in the fourth Test. When you look at openers across the world at the moment, if you look at kind of averages over the last 2 years, I think it's been well documented that, you know, people are averaging, if you're averaging 32, 33, you're doing well at the moment as an opener in world cricket. What that says about the standard of openers of the pitches, we don't know. But to average 52 in English conditions against it was quality seam bowl. I mean, Anderson was on his game most of the series. Ollie Robinson was a revelation. You know, he scored the century at the Oval when Wokes was back in the side. So, yeah, I mean, that century at the Oval in difficult conditions was, I watched it all on the TV. It was a superb knock, you know, technically as well as mentally. So,
and he never looks flustered either. He just takes everything in his stride.
I mean, the guy's 34. I mean, I'm amazed that he's had such a poor record away from home, having watched him in this Test match series. So I don't know what it has been about it. Whether he just hasn't mentally been up for it away from home, I've no idea. But to see him score the runs he did in the way he did, it just amazes me that he hasn't made more runs in conditions outside of India. It just staggers me. I don't know what Neil and Knuckles' thoughts on that are, but it just staggers me, really.
He seems to put that to bed a little bit, Knuckle, doesn't he, with this series? Because he has been criticised for not performing overseas. He has been criticised. Yeah, a lot of people have classed him as a white ball player that can't quite crack it at Test level, particularly overseas. But he has gone a long way to addressing that by the looks of it.
I mean, he's looked good throughout this tour of England, including the World Test Championship final. Just watching him bat and watching how well he was able to put into place what his clear game plan was, which was to be much more circumspect about what he played at. He was very happy to leave the ball. He wasn't remotely flustered by the fact that if you look at this series, he scored 0.8 of a run and over slower than his career strike rate. And he wasn't remotely bothered by that fact. He was very happy to soak up that pressure and to not drive too much outside of the off stump, and knowing that he would get his chances later on. He's had a strange Test career, Rohit Sharma, really. He was very in and out of the side as a middle order player, wasn't able to find a way into the team for a long time, for a lot longer than people thought. Never quite took his chances. And then as an opener, just the vagaries of the schedule meant that he didn't play that much away from home for a long period of time. And then he had a run of, there was that series in India when England toured, but then he's been almost exclusively away from home ever since. It's a measure of how important it is to India that he's there. That he as soon as he was fit in Australia, he came back in, and the side looked much more solid as a result. Even when he's not been scoring, we've got the sense that this has been coming throughout the series, and it isn't just Rohit Sharma; it's what he and KL Rahul were able to do together at the top of the order.
That opening partnership was huge. And Neil, the one thing with Rohit was that sometimes he got criticised for getting very pretty 20s and 30s. We've heard that before with England's middle order at times, but couldn't actually kick on and get the big score. I saw a lot of Indian fans berating him for that fact, but he's a joy to watch as well, isn't he? He's just he's one of my favourite batsmen to watch, and when he's playing like he has done, and as Knuckles says, patience, and he looks like he was actually reveling in the fact that he was being stubborn in this series. It's terrific combination.
The patience is the thing that's new for me. I think the Rohit that I'm used to seeing away from home tends to get caught in the slips quite a lot, playing shots that he doesn't need to. But this series, his judgment outside his off stump and his happiness to not play a shot has been completely different.
Just a couple of pulls down to final leg, weren't there, that kind of let him down a little bit. But apart from that,
yeah, that's muscle memory, isn't it? Rohit is probably the best puller of the ball since Ricky Ponting, but he's so used to playing it in white ball cricket that when the ball doesn't come quite as straight, quite as true, he can't trust the bounce quite as much. The muscle memory still makes him play the shot, but he doesn't catch it quite sweetly.
I think some batsmen are just instinctive pullers and hookers as well. I mean, I know when I've played at my very substandard level, whenever the ball's been up around my nose, I just can't help myself. I have to have a dart at it, and I think Rohit's got a little bit of me in him. Well,
really?
no, actually, no, he hasn't. He hasn't. Let's move on that note to the batsman of the series. We've got 3 awards left. Batsman of the series, champagne moment of the series, and the player of the series, full stop, of both sides. The batsman of this series, the nominations are the aforementioned Rohit Sharma, the aforementioned Joe Root, and the occasionally mentioned KL Rahul. And the winner is Joseph Edward Root. He's pipped Rohit Sharma to the crown of batsman of the series. We've already spoken about Rooty for the first 10 minutes of this podcast, but very quickly, Mark, one thing with Root, that pressure, and the same way that Rohit had it, really, because Rohit was opening the innings knowing that 3, 4, 5 in the order were not being particularly productive for much of that series. Joe Root knew that 1 to 3 and then 5 to 11 weren't being particularly productive in the series.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the bar is very low, below what Joe was performing at, and it's a good job he did perform until, obviously, Hamid came in the side and had a couple of decent opening partnerships, and Malan made him look a little bit more solid as well for a while. But yeah, as we've said all through the series, everything else collapsing around him and coming in at 10 for 2 and all this carry on, and getting hundreds and losing test matches and then having to save them. And yeah, I mean, it's been and not only that, he's been to India where he scored runs and then they got the 200, won the test match, but then they lost the series again. So he's been scoring lots of runs in vain, if you like, in terms of winning test series.
That must be so frustrating, Rito.
Isn't it? So it's like mentally challenging, isn't it? I go out and get 100, but we're going to lose. So we ain't going to win, and it's kind of got to do it again and again and again.
He must feel, Rito, that he's banging his head against a brick wall at times, because the occasions, as Mark says, where he's actually walked off with a century in a winning cause have been maybe twice over the winter. Well, obviously in Sri Lanka he did quite nicely, but you often hear sportsmen, cricketers saying it doesn't really matter what I've got as long as we win. Well, Joe Root's not really had the second part of that equation very often, has he?
Yeah, that has been partly due to other England batsmen not contributing. Only Joe Root has been on another level. And there was a stat that until the Lord's Test that England hadn't lost a test match in which Joe Root had scored a century. But due to him having a very poor hour before lunch on that final day, England lost that game, and he can only blame himself as a captain. And the only match where he missed out on 100 at the series is where Josh Butler was on paternity leave. And that's why England were so keen to get him back into the team for that 5th Test match.
Rito's got a great big stirring spoon when he like grins at me when he says the word name Josh Butler. Knuckle, comparing the two captains in this series, you've got Joe Root, who's smashing out runs left, right, and centre and not being able to get a winning side together, and Virat Kohli, who's struggled by his high standards throughout the series and had a winning team. You know, they must be looking at each other thinking, I wish I could have your runs, or I wish I could have your side.
Yeah, although, again, I'm not entirely I don't think Virat Kohli would trade the runs for the wins. I don't think many players would. It just doesn't.
I mean to have both together.
Of course. Everyone wants to be greedy. Obviously, sports people are pathologically competitive and pathologically driven to win. So of course you'd want both, and they've had periods where they've had both. I mean, Virat Kohli's had these series where he's done outrageously well with the bat as an individual in India. I think back to when England were in India in 2016 would be a good example, and there are others as well. And Virat Kohli, I think, showed the difference between a world-class player in form and a world-class player out of form. Virat Kohli was able to score some runs and do okay in this series and look better and better as it went on, but was clearly not completely in control of his game.
He needed a 5th Test match, Knuckle, didn't he? Because as you say, the curve was going upwards, and by the 5th one, he might have been supreme. Maybe.
I mean, there were times in the 3rd and 4th, or certainly the 4th Test, where he looked as though he was going to go on and get 100 in both innings. I think both on both occasions, and that wasn't the only time in the series. And not the only time in this scoreless run, but I mean, Virat Kohli has this. People talk about his intensity and his his drive and his passion. And I've seen a few slightly over the top pieces about how in the wake of this sort of defenses of him with India, pulling out of the series. I think it's over the top to say that Virat Kohli is propping up Test cricket, because I think there's been some excellent Test cricket in the last few years that hasn't involved India, but full stop. But there's no doubt about his drive for greatness in Test cricket and how much.
Well, it's been utterly ridiculous when you see them criticising the Indian players for kind of bottling it effectively and going home for the IPL, and kind of pictures of Virat Kohli on that article. And you're thinking, there's nobody that's more fiercely competitive than Virat Kohli. There's nobody that likes Test cricket more than Virat Kohli.
Well, it shows you just how. Now, we're not. I don't know how much we're going to get into this discussion. Whether the fears
not very much.
Sure. Whether the fears
you want to keep this one positive today.
Yeah, I know. However, whether the fears were justified or not, whether they had complete logical basis to them, the panic that went around the Indian dressing room, it shows you how severe that was, that it got to that point where this Indian team, led by this Indian captain, were even considering pulling out of a Test series with the chance to win the series outright on the line, which is something that this team has wanted, and would kind of mark them out as one of the great.
Well, they might have done that yet. We don't know, because we don't actually know what the score is.
Well, quite. But they've given up the potential chance to do that. Joe Root had an awful morning on the 5th morning at Lord's. He carried the can for it himself publicly in the press conference. It's never entirely one person's fault, but he took it on the chin, and he took the responsibility as the captain, going down with the ship. I'm sure there were discussions with the bowlers and with the team, but that he wasn't able to stop everyone getting carried away, including himself. Virat Kohli has a really good bowling attack to match the intensity that he carries himself as a person. We've seen other aggressive captains go with this method of trying to be sort of hunting packs and try and be all over the opposition, but it looks hollow and a bit ridiculous when you don't have the bowlers to back it up. And he's reveling in the fact that he's got this group of bowlers now who can do exactly what he wants them to do. He had a very good series as a captain, Virat Kohli, and Joe Root. I wonder if there's a support group. I wonder if he can have a chat with Brian Lara and Shivnarine Chanderpaul and a few other of these guys, or late period Michael Clark, or sort of mid period Michael Clark, I guess, clearly world-class players in a failing team where they're having to do all of the work and score all of the runs. I wonder if there's a a WhatsApp group that they can.
Well, they all get together at Christmas, Knuckle, and talk about it all as they open their presents. Let's move on to the next award. I've not forgotten you, Neil, because I'm going to come to you with the after the next one. Can I just ask you a favour? When you're resting, can you not stroke your beard next to your microphone?
All right, sorry.
That's right. Champagne moments of the series. 5 nominations for this because we had some very wide and varied and all very valid suggestions for this. Jasprit Bumrah's Yorker to Johnny Bairstow. Shardul Thakur's match, basically. He's 2 for 50. He's 2 50s and his wickets. Rohit's first overseas ton. He's 127. Jimmy Anderson getting out Virat Kohli for a golden duck. And finally, India's second innings bowling at Lords after Virat Kohli's pep talk before they came out. Let's give him 60 overs of hell. And the winner is Step Up Virat Kohli. It is the performance at Lords, Virat Kohli's pep talk leading to that second innings bowling performance. And you can now see the method in my madness, Neil, because I want to come to you about Virat Kohli's captaincy. And obviously that was a terrific day at Lords for Team India. I've talked to you a lot on these podcasts about Virat Kohli's captaincy. I've had severe reservations about his heart on his sleeve kind of way of leading India, sometimes a little bit too much. I was really impressed with him. He looks like he's getting better. He looks like he's understanding the role. That little pep talk ahead of 60 overs of hell was a terrific little insight to how he's leading that team. And he expects nothing less than a certain standard from everybody in that side. And he drives them forward all the time. We've said often during this series, he must be so absolutely knackered by the time he goes to bed because he kind of burns about 50 calories every time the ball comes down. He's jumping up and twisting and his face is contorting. But I think he's getting better now.
Well, that's what you want, isn't it? You don't want to be like Steve Smith, staying up all night, shadow batting and getting burnt out to lead to sandpaper gates. You want to leave it all out on the field. And I thought he was superb as a captain in this series. I thought throughout the heads didn't really seem to drop, even in Headingley on that second day when Joe Root was scoring at will, and so was Dawid Malan really. But still, they managed to come back in the evening session and take 7 wickets in the evening session, out of nowhere, pretty much, to reduce that lead. I mean, it still ended up at sort of 350, but it could have been completely out of sight. And by the end of the third day, there was still a glimmer that got blown out the next day. But it's that thing with the India team under Virat is that they never ever give up.
Well, they never know when they're beaten, do they? They could be 400 behind on first innings, and Virat Kohli would still be looking at a way to try and get back and win it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that personal fire that he's got that you see he will never back down from a fight personally. But now the team has been built in his image. I know in Australia that he went home after the first match and Rahane took over the captaincy, but the whole team, all the way through to the A-sides, I say, are now built in Virat's image in that they'll always be up for a fight. KL Rahul said, you come at one of us and all 11 will come back at you. And that's the timidity that seemed to flow through the Indian teams 20 years ago when they went abroad. There is none of that anymore. We can't be intimidated in the same way that we were in the past. And I think some teams have spoken to that as well. In fact, some teams now go completely the other way. New Zealand don't sledge at all when they play India, especially against Virat. And if you watch the test, that was the plan for Tim Paine's Australia, although they fell away. And actually at Lords, it was when England decided to get into that fight with with the bowlers over the short bowling at Jimmy Anderson. That's where it all fell away for England.
Big mistake, that wasn't it? That's England never really got back on the rails after that. There's a couple of other ones in this in the nominations which I think are worthy of mention. We talked about Rohit's century, but Shardul Thakur, Knuckle, coming into the Indian side, he wasn't ever present throughout the series, but when he did play, and particularly that match he had at Headingley, he made a big difference to him, didn't he? He is a little bit innocuous to look at with the bowling. His batting stats don't particularly suggest Vivian Richards is walking out there, but he suddenly seemed to go up a couple of gears.
Yeah, he had two very effective but two completely different Test matches. At Trent Bridge, he was very sort of quietly effective and bowled very nagging lines and lengths, getting the ball to move a little bit here and there, and was a very good sort of foil, essentially doing the Jadeja role, because Jadeja barely bowled in that Test match, and then he became this sort of effervescent drama magnet, really, in the fourth Test match. Just everything was happening every time to him and around him, and he generally batted completely fearlessly. Again, very similar in a way to the Brisbane Test match where he came in and he and Washington Sundar put on those runs, but this was even more aggressive and actually from an even worse position. I think they were about 100 for 6 when Shardul Thakur came in. And, it looked like it was just having a bit of fun. And to some extent, I'm sure he was. But he's got this... people in the team talk about his intense competitiveness and the fact he carries himself like a cricketer with a much higher reputation and a much higher ceiling than he's actually got. And he drives himself to get the most out of himself. And probably, in many ways... probably isn't quite right for the balance of the team and can only do so much. He's a swing bowler who is a little bit ineffective when the ball isn't swinging, but he's got this. He's a little bit better than batters think he is, and that mismatch sometimes between the expectation and the reality can be fatal. And with the bat, he's generally become a very useful lower order batter with a good range of attacking strokes, and he was immensely important in that. Probably never quite going to get player of the match, and I think Rohit Sharma was rightly.
So we talked about that through the Test match, didn't we? And we both felt that Rohit was probably just ahead of him, despite the public clamour for Shardul.
Yeah, and despite the all-round performance, in terms of impact or impact against expected impact, as it were, with Shardul Thakur, immensely important. And cricket can often be, or sport can often be very much about, if you measure it against, the strength of your weakest link. I mean, Shardul Thakur is the weakest, probably Rahane really in the series, but in terms of reputation, certainly Shardul Thakur more than held his own in that series and was genuinely a lot of fun to watch with the bat.
And he came across really well when I saw him interviewed after that match. I thought he came across really well as well. And just go to that Lancastrian down in the bottom right. About Jimmy Anderson, the ball that got Virat Kohli out for Golden Duck. That was a tremendous over from Jimmy. He started the series off like a house on fire, didn't he, with that spell? And a little bit about that, but also the fact that I saw his message the other day to fans saying that he was so sorry that he hadn't, the Test hadn't gone ahead and what have you, and he hopes that he will get another chance against India, and he hopes that he'll get another chance to play an international at Old Trafford. And that's a bit. I mean, it's obviously a ground he loves, and it would be really sad, wouldn't it, to see him hang his boots up on that note at his home ground?
Yeah, but I wouldn't read too much in when he says he hopes, because the thing that keeps Anderson going is this belief that he's always going to get dropped. So he always says he hopes he's going to get picked for the next Test match, and he hopes to play. And it's kind of his way of self-motivation. So I know a lot of people have read a lot into these kind of comments, thinking he might not play next year and what have you, but I'm pretty confident he'll carry on. And, when he likes to think he's always on the edge of the side, he's got to perform. And that's why he likes coming back and playing for Lancashire, so he gets wickets, so he get back in the Test match side, which is, at least maintains his place. So it would be sad if he ends up in as you said, in that no, but I'm 100% certain as long as he's performing, he's not going to retire. If he has a bad tour of Australia, that might swing it the other way, but I hope he gets to play at Old Trafford again, because he loves the club. He's a one-club person, has been all his life. He's learned his trade from the coaches at the club. Mike Watkinson was his first coach at Lancashire, coming from Burnley, and he taught him quite taught him all he knew, not all he knew, but certainly the fundamentals of swing bowling. So I'm sure he will carry on, and I'm sure it won't be a last hurrah.
Rito, Jimmy, so much has been said about him. 39 years old now, but he's still got it, hasn't he? He's still doing it. You know, as Mark said there, it's almost like he's not going to retire. He's going to have to be either shot or dragged off.
Yeah, absolutely. How that fire that he has still got inside himself at 39 years old, it just amazes me as a Jimmy Anderson fan. And yes, throughout his career, he has odd moment when he has got into an altercation with opposition players, but not everyone is Alistair Cook, that they will just play the game with so much dignity throughout their career. So Jimmy Anderson, he has been just fantastic. The way he started this Test series, as you rightly mentioned, getting Pujara and Kohli in the same over, and even Rahul was dropped in the slip. Otherwise, India could have been bowled very cheaply, and England would have posted a much larger total.
Things, Rito, though, everybody's different, aren't they? You get some people who, if there's a hint of confrontation, they'll put their head down, and probably people would see it as showing dignity and walking away. Other people will take another step further forward, won't they? And maybe Jimmy's one of those. But yeah, it's going to be a sad day when Jimmy Anderson goes, as we've said through this series. There's a legend in front of us. We need to soak him into our retinas and make sure that we remember as much as we can of him, because he won't be here forever, despite the fact that he's trying to be. Let's move on to our final award then of this gala evening. And thank you, everybody, for attending. The player of the series, the man of the series, and the nominations are Jasprit Bumrah, Rohit Sharma, Shardul Thakur, and Joseph Edward Root. It kind of tells you everything you need to know. The fact there's 3 Indian nominations there and 1 English. And the winner is Rohit Sharma, who's got the most votes from the fan badges. Joe Root was only just behind him. Jasprit Bumrah was not far away either. But Rohit Sharma is the man that you have voted for to be the man of the series. Didn't get the most runs, but he got important runs, and he certainly gave India a good start in pretty much every single test match. So Rohit Sharma is our man of the series, and that concludes our award ceremony. As I said, 2-1. We don't quite know what that fourth test, that final test match will be awarded and how it's going to be sorted out, whether the ICC will have to move into adjudicate. We might even have to do with this all again sometime next summer if that's called the 5th test match, but hopefully it'll be a standalone test match and we can cover that in its in isolation. But first of all, thank you very much, Nakul. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Rito, for your efforts during this series. It's been much appreciated. To all the other fan badges that couldn't make it tonight, thank you to you as well, because you've all put in some sterling stints on the podcast, and your enthusiasm and your knowledge and your words are much appreciated, and I'm sure they are by the watchers and listeners as well. Talking of which, thank you very much for everybody out there for watching and listening. It has been much appreciated. Your comments, your tweets as we've gone through this England against India series have kept us all going and kept the questions coming in, and that's been really good to have as well. And of course, we're not going to be away for very long, because the IPL 19th, and we're back in IPL. Actually, I think I'm recording something on Wednesday to get us back into IPL mode. So we'll be doing the same things, the live videos for the IPL, and then you'll be able to hear the audio podcasts later on. But thank you very much. Thank you for coming, India. I know that it's kind of gone with a little bit of a sour taste at the end, with a lot of people going with barbs and, yeah, whatever the reason, whatever the thing. Thanks for coming, India, because it was 4 terrific test matches that we saw. And if that 5th one is never played, well, it's sad, and it was a bad way to finish the series. But the 4 tests we saw were absolutely magnificent entertainment, and I've really enjoyed, along with the fan badges, talking about all that on this podcast. So thank you again, Neil. Thank you, Nakul. Thank you, Rito, and thank you, Mark. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody. I've been James the Cricket Badger, and we'll see you in IPL mode very soon indeed.